According to Urban Dictionary, token standing is when someone stands a celebrity or artist because they are popular in order to use that person or group to hate on others. It's important to note that these people don't actually like the group or person. They're just using them as a tool to spread hate towards artists they don't like or artists they perceive to be threats to their actual faves. In contrast, bandwagon standing is standing or taking an interest in something just to fit in with everyone else. Token and bandwagon standing isn't a new phenomenon and has existed in all forms of media for a long time, but I've always found its involvement in K-pop to be really interesting, which is why I decided to center this video around the K-pop industry. Just so we're all on the same page, this video isn't an argumentative essay, but more so of a critical essay examining this topic in further detail. I think it's fairly obvious that this is a phenomenon that affects girl groups the most. We'll see a girl group have a successful debut or just a well-received one. The K-pop community will rally behind them, give them a lot of hype, until they feel like they no longer create good music or aren't as successful as before. For example, STAYC had a debut that was well received, but it wasn't until their first comeback ASAP did they catch the attention of K-pop stans and gain a lot of new fans, both genuine and non-genuine alike. And as we know, Stereotype and Run to You were even more successful. It wasn't until they released Beautiful Monster, which wasn't as well received, did we see the K-pop stans that were token and bandwagon standing them then show their true colors. Now, STAYC is just one of many examples of this happening to mainly 4th-gen girl groups. But fortunately for them, by the time the K-pop community quote-unquote turned on them, they had already grew solid fan bases both domestically and internationally, so it didn't hit them as hard, which unfortunately isn't always the case. By now, you may be asking, why? Why is this such a problem for K-pop girl groups? The answer is, yeah, you guessed it, misogyny. Before I explain how these actions are inherently misogynistic, I'd like to explain how this system came to be through the patriarchy. Defined by Oxford Languages, the patriarchy is a system of society or government in which men hold the power and women are largely excluded from it. And defined by psychologytoday.com, misogyny is the control, punishment, and policing of people and systems which threaten male dominance. And because we live in a patriarchal society, misogyny and other forms of oppression are allowed to run rampant, and is something that I think we've all internalized as children, and is something that we must unlearn as teenagers and adults. Now that we know what misogyny and the patriarchy is, and how they go hand in hand, let's apply it to the work field. Like I mentioned earlier, the patriarchy is a system that allows men, usually white men, to hold most of the power, and forces women and other marginalized groups to fight for the scraps left behind. This especially lays true for women in the workplace. In an article written on feminisminIndia.com, Donna Mini Maheta writes, "Institutions don't have any incentive to create spaces for women beyond the tokenistic, inclusive spaces they have to create, a very half-hearted effort at the bare minimum to bridge the gender gap. It's like there's this unspoken rule that only a few will make it, which is what causes animosity between women and encourages an unnecessary need for women to always be in competition with each other. Since being an idol is still a job, the expectations for women are exactly the same. This explains why the K-pop industry is so harsh towards women, and why K-pop stans may be incentivized to tokenize a certain girl group, then pit them against other girl groups. Another way we see this manifest is through the 7-year curse on girl groups. While both boy groups and girl groups can have 7-year contracts, for girl groups, it feels more like a deadline instead of just an option. This has been changing in recent times, but for a long time, girl groups had to rely on the general public support in order to really survive. And because the general public is so fickle, By the time the 7-year deadline came, a lot of these girl groups lost that needed support, and therefore had little to no choice but to disband. Of course, this doesn't lay true for every single girl group, and a few of them have beat this curse. Since there seems to be an invisible barrier limiting how many girl groups can be at the top at once, people are always looking for the next big thing. And once they found it, the girl group that they loved just a week ago is now old news. And since this is still a pressing issue, let's talk about the most recent case of token and bandwagon standing in K-pop. Recently, I've seen a lot of discourse online surrounding 50/50's path to fame, and I'd like to give my insight on it, because it does have a lot to do with this topic. To the ones who are unaware, 50/50 is under the South Korean company Attract Entertainment, which was considered to be a small company by most people, hence them being on Nugu Promoter before they had even debuted. VJ Friedman is Attract's CEO. This point is going to be important later. The main source of conversation has been concerning an interview that VJ Friedman did a while back, claiming that he had to sell his car and eat cheap meals in order to afford 50/50's debut. So, with all the success that 50/50 has earned, it seems like they've had somewhat of an underdog story. This point is also going to be important later. This didn't really become a problem for real until this tweet. Personally, I feel like it's blatantly obvious that this tweet was just a cheap ploy to start a fan war. Like, we're clearly dealing with a troll here, but unfortunately that wasn't as obvious to two certain fandoms. And I think we all know which two fandoms I'm talking about here. Anyways, remember when I said these 2 points would be important later? That's where these come in. There's been some claims that VJ Friedman lied about having to sell his car in order to afford 50/50's debut, and that 50/50 is actually backed by a big company, that big company being Warner Music Korea. The argument is that 50/50's CEO lied about this fact in order to give them an underdog story that they don't deserve, and in fact, they actually have company privilege. Given the evidence you're seeing on your screen now, you might be convinced, and you might be thinking, well, it seems as though they have a point. And I'm not here to dispute that. I'm simply just going to give another perspective, because at the end of the day, no one truly knows the situation except for VJ Friedman. So, for argument's sake, let's say that these claims are true. Even if this is true and they are backed by a big company, nothing about their path to success would really change. Since the release of Loving Me, a pre-release on their debut album The 50, 50/50 has received a lot of praise for having such quality music out the gate. For months, people were gushing over their debut album, and there was so much conversation online about how good it was. And not once was them possibly being backed by Warner Music Korea mentioned. You may be wondering, why is that? The simple answer is, no one cared. Everyone simply just loved the music. This didn't become an issue, or even a topic of conversation, until they started charting on Billboard and became the girl group with the most monthly listeners on Spotify, which isn't a surprise in the slightest. The K-pop community switching up on a girl group they were just hyping up 2 days ago. I mean, we've all seen this story play out before, at least 500 times. So what you really should be asking is, how could it be company privilege if nobody knew about it until long after they went viral? Because at the end of the day, these claims could in fact be true, and VJ Friedman could have lied about having to sell his car and eat cheap meals in order to afford 50/50's debut, with the intention that you guys thought it was. But the facts about this matter still remain. Those facts being, 1. People have to know that you're under a big company before you debut in order for that company privilege to actually be company privilege. 2. Since nobody even mentioned this whole Warner Music Korea thing until after they blew up, in the event that this entire debacle is even true, everything that I mentioned earlier is more than enough to prove that them going viral had nothing to do with Warner Music Korea. Oh, and that's not even dabbling into all the people claiming that 50/50 has been using payola when they first started charting on Billboard. But that's a conversation for another day. Anyways, what makes this so crazy but also not surprising in the slightest, because like I said, we've seen this story play out so many times before, it hasn't even been 3 months since Cupid blew up, and people are already starting to turn on them. Like, most of these girl groups had at least 5 months apiece before went left. That's how bad this has gotten. Unfortunately, even though there's been a shitload of girl groups with minors debuting now, I still see this problem only getting worse.
It's our time. 우린 달라. 특별한 게 좋아. Oh, what a good time.
In the third part of this video, I talked about how the action of tokenizing and later abandoning female artists is most likely attributed to the way society sees women due to the patriarchy. But I haven't talked about how this behavior can also be a choice. While indoctrination can be an explanation for this behavior, it isn't a justification for it. To further explain this point, I'd like to give 2 examples of similar phenomenons in K-pop. The first one being how K-pop stans will be aware of Mnet's evil editing but will still contribute to that toxicity by hating on trainees that have been evil edited, just because they either don't like them or see them as threats to their main picks. The second example is how K-pop stans will be 100% aware about how misogynistic the industry can be, and will even speak out against it, just to contribute to that and participate in it when it benefits them, like hating on a group that they perceive to be threats to their faves, or just doing so because they have a personal vendetta against said group. Over the course of this video, you might have noticed that there's been 2 reoccurring themes that I've mentioned multiple times during this video. Those themes being, the reasoning behind why these 3 phenomenons exist are because a stan feels threatened towards another group or another idol, or they have a personal vendetta against another group or idol. This is how token standing and these other toxic behaviors are also a deliberate choice. I think we all know that K-pop is a form of escapism for a lot of K-pop stans, which is completely fine. There's nothing wrong with having something that makes you happy and that helps you cope or forget the bad things that are going on in your everyday life, unless you're using it as an opportunity to spread toxicity. It becomes toxic when stans start to live through their idols. So, when you're living through someone, pretending like their success is yours, everything feels 10 times more personal than it should. So, when a group wins an award that you feel like your fave deserved, or when you feel like a group is catching up to your fave, ready to dethrone them, it's going to feel like a hard punch to the gut, an action that you have no choice but to retaliate against. One might be thinking, if someone who uses K-pop as a form of escapism, escaping all of the bad things in their life, and develops a negative parasocial relationship from it, can they really still be blamed? This might come as a surprise, but my answer is yes. In an article on teenvogue.com, the writer Stitch states, "We develop parasocial relationships based on repeated interactions with these figures on social media or on television that make them seem relatable and accessible, rather than far away from us regular people." So parasocial relationships as a concept isn't inherently a bad thing, and isn't something that someone should be blamed for, but what you do with said relationship is your responsibility. For example, you can be a fan of a certain celebrity or piece of media and create a space, like a Discord server or a group chat, for people to be able to interact with people who love the same things you do, and possibly make solid friendships along the way. Or you could use your platform to start fan wars and to put other people down. Both of these options are choices that you and you alone are responsible for. The way the K-pop industry is framed now for girl groups, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. If your group is unsuccessful, that's a struggle in itself, right? But if you beat the odds and have a comeback that's successful, You only have a matter of time to build a solid fan base that will last you for years to come. And if you don't, you're right back to where you originally started. All we can do at this point is hope that K-pop stans will stop allowing and participating in this toxic behavior, and once that happens, I do believe that K-pop companies will have no choice but to follow behind. Thank you to everyone who made it to the end of this video. This actually took me a really long time to make because I wrote this script from scratch without any notes, which I don't know why I thought that was a good idea, but anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm really interested to hear what your thoughts are, so let me know what you thought of this video in the comments. Lastly, if anyone would like to read any of the articles that I mentioned in this video, I'll have them in the description box below. So that's all I have for today, and hopefully I'll see y'all later.